but what he did is default is on turf, not on anything to do with racism or the race question, but on economics and on national defense. It was his to lose. So the fact of the matter is the South is Reagan's to lose now. And as long as, if Reagan goes and denounces his own economic policy or doesn't balance the budget or, he could lose the South. But if not, he's going to get the South.
But he's not going to lose the South if he goes along with what the blacks want in voting.
That should be a thrust of this. In other words, in 1968, the whole Southern strategy that Hearing has put together, the Voting Rights Act would have been a central part of keeping the South. Now they don't have to do that. All you got to do to keep the South is for Reagan to run in place on the issues he's campaigned on since 1964. And that's fiscal conservative, balancing the budget, cutting taxes, the whole cluster, and being tough on national defense. And it's going to be very hard for Reagan to do.
But whether I'm not saying that he does this consciously, but the fact is that he does get to the Wallace voter and to the racist side of the Wallace voter by doing away with legal services, by doing away with cutting down on food stamps.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not. Is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this.
All right, I won't do it.
You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you, backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
Reminds me of a great story that was told in one of the biographies of Huey Long. When Huey went to Catholic Hospital, which had been a target of the racists down there because there were white folks working on blacks, white nurses working on black patients. It was also, he had promised lots of blacks more jobs and upgrading jobs when he was running for election. So he went to the hospital one day and just raised hell about all them white people working on blacks. And why did they get some more blacks in the place? Work on blacks rather than have these clean, looking white nurses working on blacks. So he satisfied both constituents. He got blacks more jobs, did away with money.
Yeah, and Huey Long, interesting, he was the only single one of those guys who you can always find some traces of that stuff that was consistently didn't use the racial issue.
Well, he used it, but then he turned it around for himself.
Yeah, but I'm talking about when you look at who at Bartleman and all these guys.
What about this thing that you written?
I don't want to show you that shit because I'm not satisfied with it. That answers your question.
Yeah, it answers the question. Okay, good enough.
Is that all you?
That's all I did.
You doing all right?
I'm doing fine. How about you? We never did get to the barbecue.
I don't want to do that.
I made some out of the house over there. It turned out well. Southern style. I mean, Texas style.
Well, let me give you.
Well, that was a good introduction.
Yeah.
I want to take you back to 1970, and you could sort of jump from 70 to 80 and ask you what happened to the...
Oh, wait a minute. Let me make sure Saul knew that I didn't want to record it.
Oh.
Hey, Saul.
So I want to take you back to 1970, as you jump from 70 to 80 and the impact of the race issue on the South. And I'm particularly interested in the statewide races and how you see race was, what the importance race was in the race good.
70s.
Yeah, in the 70s.
Well,
It just didn't, just with the election of these moderate Democrats you talked about, it didn't just fade away. It just stayed here, and I wondered how you saw it.
Well, I think what happened is what, all these different factors are independent factors, but they work together also. So you had two things happening in the 70s. You had a situation where, starting in 66 and on through the 80s, the moderate or most liberal, as long there's an invisible line of where you when you become a liberal in the South. When you become a liberal, you're in trouble, even in the Democratic primary. But if you're a good moderate, you stake out a victory in the Democratic primary, is what was happening in the Democratic primaries in the South. In other words, you came to a situation by 72, 74, and then right on through the 70s. Racism was not only a non-issue, but it was a dangerous and self-destructive issue in a Democratic primary. But blatant liberalism, in most cases, was just as destructive. So what you had was kind of a moderation of Democratic primary. Then you had the development that started in the 60s, but a hardening up and affirming development of a 25 to 35% Republican Party, Republican base vote. You had the advent of Republican primaries in the South. There might have been 2 or 3 primaries in the 60s, but in the 70s you had a new creature called Republican primaries. I know we had our first one in South Carolina in 1974. Basically, conservative primaries were extremely conservative, extremely right-wing. Now, race never became an issue as such. It was basically who was the most conservative. And when I say conservative, I mean conservative. Hello? But race was never discussed within the framework of a Republican primary that I'm Then you had to go to a general election. What you had was a Republican conservative against a moderate Democrat. The Republican conservative got generally, that's where first of all, the issues were devoid of any talk about race and so forth for the most part. But what you had winning these, in the general election, the candidate that could best, the way the Republicans won was getting the Wallace vote, getting the blue collar vote, getting the white vote. So, any way that you, in a coded sense, any racism that was used.
Like Brock's race in the 70s when he won the Senate seat.
Yeah.
And even the one in Virginia.
That's right. Any racism was used.
Yeah.
Well, busing, all of these coded.
Bernie in Florida.
Yeah.
Bernie in Florida.
Well, I didn't follow that race at all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
But just to tie in with this, you talked about the white-blue collar worker being a sort of pivotal vote. You were talking about presidential elections in particular. But now just what I'm more interested in is the gubernatorial and the U.S. Senator race.
Gubernatorial.
And in those, wouldn't you say that in most states, the Democratic candidate has been able, in that period from about 72 to 78, to pull those voters, keep those voters, and that's why the Republican Party.
That is right. Now, let me give you an example of someone who I'm very close with and have been for years. Is Strom Thurmond. Basically, Republicans, and I think 80 could be a watershed year, but that's irrelevant. Republicans still don't get elected statewide in the South. And the reason is the Republican Party has not been able to put together a coalition of enough blue-collar people, George Wallace type voters, and country club people. That's
what you say about 80? Did you say 80 was?
80 was the first year that Republicans did that, on another level other than just presidential. In other words, Richard Nixon in 72 in the 5th Congressional District of South Carolina gets 72% of the vote. The Republican congressional candidate gets 31. and you had that across the whole South. In other words, you have to totally separate presidential politics from the rest of politics. But 80, you know, east winds, Hawkins wind, across the South, the candidate that best dealt with the economic issues got 71% of George Wallace type vote. The whole key is getting 70% of that vote. It's very tough to do. Those people are my pappy was a Democrat, and his pappy was a Democrat type people. So in order to get them, you have to have some very sexy, appealing type of verbiage in the campaign and the right kind of issues to get to them. Strom Thurmond's been able to do that better than anyone. He has always, Strom Thurmond got 82% of the white voters in 1978. He literally got all of the Republicans and all of the blue-collar type voters. The average Republican candidate has not been able to penetrate the blue-collar voter out there.
Strong is an exception, of course, because he's
That's right, and he has been a Democrat, and
Democrat.
he campaigns in a very, well, I'll put it to you this way. I've managed 27 Republican campaigns in the South, and I have never used the word Republican, or never put a Republican symbol on any campaign letter or any campaign printer. You don't win elections in the South, and I think this is still the case, by advertising that you're a Republican. What you have to do is put your candidate up there and have the best candidate and have the best issues to put together a coalition of basically 30% Republican and you know, basically the breakdown now is you've got a base of 30% Republican, 40% Democrat, 45% Democrat, and the rest independents. So you literally have to get out there and put all the independents together and all the Republicans together. And there has not really been a meaningful Republican Party in the South in the 70s to the extent of other than Virginia, which the way I analyze the parties, I did a paper in like 78 analyzing the parties. You know, Virginia is a statistical artifact, and it's not a southern state as such demographically when you look at the deep South. You know, the deep South is one thing, and then the peripheral South is another. Well, it's...
Yeah. Well, how do you see the race in at this level, sub-presidential level? Of course, you know, I can see your argument about Reagan's use of the issue or non-use of it, but he has a national constituency. But how is the Republican Party going to come to grips with it?
Well, I believe.
I think Carol Campbell's an interesting
I assume you know he's been a
example.
client of mine for 10 years.
Oh, is that right? I interviewed him a couple of years ago,
Well, they got Campbell and I back to back in this.
Oh, oh, yeah. I'll have to take a look at this. He's a very interesting politician, and in this interview,
Well,
he was very candid about the black vote. He talked about that race in South Carolina in '78 for the governorship, and the use of the appeal of the Republican candidate to, I guess, the black voters, and how it backfired on him because it was a delicate thing. He said he went out and ran radio ads saying, "Black people, why vote for the Democrats? What have they given you? The one-party system, segregation, and so forth." But he said, well, he overdid it. And I thought that was interesting.
Campbell was a guy who I managed every campaign he had. So we're kind of two guys that grew up together in this stuff. Well, I think, in my judgment, Karl Marx is the type of race and religion will always be, there'll always be the real issues ultimately are the economic issues. I'm not sophisticated enough to be an economic determinist or anything like that. But race will be within the framework because I feel like there's almost going to be a class struggle type of atmosphere, and blacks are going to statistically be on one side of it. And I think, for instance, the Republican Party, and I tell these Republican candidates, are going to have a hard time getting black voters, masses of black voters, just by appointing a black to be the Air Force Secretary or something like that. They're either going to have to change their entire issues to appeal to the masses, or keep the same